Israel and Hamas have agreed a Gaza ceasefire and a hostage release deal. The deal, mediated by Qatar and the US, follows 15 months of war. Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul, Rahman Thani say the agreement will come into effect on Sunday so long as it is approved by the Israeli cabinet. US President Joe Biden says it will halt the fighting in Gaza and allow much needed humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians and reunite the hostages with their families. The Israeli Prime Minister's office said earlier there are several unresolved clauses, but it hoped details will be finalized later tonight. A Hamas official said it had approved the draft from mediators.
In exchange, Israel released hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. And during phase one, the Palestinians can also return to their neighborhoods in all the areas of Gaza. And the surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza will begin. And the innocent people can have a greater access to these vital supplies. You know, during the next 6 weeks, Israel will negotiate the necessary arrangements to get phase two, which is a permanent end of the war. Let me say it again, a permanent end of the war. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from phase one to phase two, but the plan says if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire will continue as long as the negotiations continue. I've spoken to the Emir of Kuwait and the President of Egypt, and we have pledged to make sure the negotiations will keep moving forward for as long as it takes. There will be an exchange for release of the remaining living hostages, including male soldiers, and all remaining Israeli forces will be withdrawn from Gaza, and the temporary ceasefire will become permanent. And finally, phase three, any final remains of hostages who have been killed will be returned to their families, and a major reconstruction plan for Gaza will begin. This is the ceasefire agreement I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement and the whole ending the war. You know, those of you who have followed the negotiations can attest, the road to this deal has not been easy. I've worked in foreign policy for decades. This is one of the toughest negotiations I've ever experienced. And we reached this point because of the pressure.
Bring in our US correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's closely monitoring developments for us and joins us live now from the United Nations in New York. Sherwin, welcome. Thanks for joining us. A 15-month Gaza war comes to an end. I mean, as we listened to US President Joe Biden iron out some of the details, he did mention this evening that there was no other way for the war to end than a hostage deal.
Yeah, but very much at the beginning of a process here, Paul, right? I mean, you have this agreement that still has to be ratified by Israel's cabinet. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu indicating that there were some minor issues that they were still ironing out, but they hope to settle those either by tonight or sometime tomorrow. But we are on a trajectory now towards a ceasefire in Gaza after more than 15 months of fighting, after precipitated, of course, by that Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. In which over 1,200 people were killed, and of course over 200 hostages, over 100 that continue to be held in Gaza today. Their condition not entirely known, but certainly, you know, hearing from outgoing President Joe Biden, whose team has been very involved in this process, the three-phase plan first mooted by the US in May of last year, then endorsed by the UN Security Council, and we've been waiting for this day ever since. We also heard from the Qatari Prime Minister that has hosted these talks in Doha, really welcoming the three-pronged initiative from the United States, Egypt, and his own country, and of course, you know, welcoming this agreement that has been long in the making between Hamas and Israel. We also heard a short time ago from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who called this a critical first step in two ways: that we are now at the beginning of a process that could lead to a pathway to peace. But then, Mpho, as you well know, there are broader issues that still remain outstanding in this decades-long conflict between the Palestinians and Israel. And this is what Antonio Guterres spoke to just moments ago. This is what he had to say. Watch.
Parties and all relevant partners to seize this opportunity to establish a credible political path to a better future for Palestinians, Israelis, and the broader region, ending the occupation and achieving a negotiated two-state solution with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security in line with international law, relevant UN resolutions and previous agreements remain an urgent priority. Only through a viable two-state solution can the aspirations of both peoples be fulfilled. I pay tribute to the civilians who have lost their lives, including UN personnel and humanitarian workers. And the United Nations is steadfast in its commitment to supporting all efforts that promote peace, stability, and a more hopeful future for the people of Palestine and Israel and across the region.
And of course, as Mpho, this ceasefire agreement takes root, right? The Qatari Prime Minister indicating that once Israel's internal processes are complete in the days ahead, this deal is set to go into effect on Sunday. That'll be the first phase. And then, of course, there are two other phases that are contingent on the successful implementation of phase one.
And as we also look to the developments and some of the reaction around this, we have also seen US President-elect Donald Trump taking to social media to claim that the deal only happened due to his election win this past November. What more are we getting from the future president and the man who will exit the White House in just a few days' time?
Well, such is the nature, I think, of this moment that everybody pretty much wants to pat themselves on the back, right? Donald Trump winning this election in November and pointing to that process as being catalytic to the process you see unfolding in Doha today. He was the first person out of the blocks in terms of, the interlocutors here to make this statement. He called this an epic ceasefire agreement that could only have happened as a result of his historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that his administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and their allies. With this deal in place, he says, we will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure that Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. Now, let me point to what President Joe Biden then came out a bit later to say, right? President Joe Biden was supposed to give a farewell address to the United States people at 8 p.m. local time in the Oval Office, but being preempted here by, President-elect Donald Trump's statement. The president himself then appearing at the White House alongside the Vice President Kamala Harris and his Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Biden very much talking about how this has been a process since he first put this three-phased plan on the table in May of last year. Both his special advisor, his Middle East envoy, and Trump's Middle East envoy played critical roles in the mediation in Doha in these final stages. But credit must also go to Doha, to the Qataris. Credit must go to Egypt. Credit must go to many other countries that have facilitated these talks between Israel and Hamas. But no less, credit must go to the Biden administration that has plugged away at this process for months, often receiving the scorn of the international community, because they, back in June, when they sought the Security Council's endorsement of this deal, had spoken about a deal being imminent. And we certainly know that since the months have passed since June last year, this deal has been painstakingly slow in reaching the point at which we are today. So credit, I think, can go to everyone, including the sacrifices that have been made by humanitarian workers in the main that have continued to plug away at these conditions that are quite catastrophic today. Despite this agreement, those catastrophic conditions still persist in Gaza today, Mpho.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sherwin.